In this video, I'm taking a look at the Moondrop Super Spaceship Pulse, or the SSP. We're going to find out, does it really have a pulse or is it dead on arrival? Let's find out. What's cracking, audio fans? It's David here from Prime Audio Reviews, and here is the SSP box. Very similar to the SSR box, as you can see there. And yeah, quite like it. No bigger than it needs to be. On the back here, you got an exploded diagram, frequency response graph, and some specs listed there in English and Chinese. So I kind of like these little boxes, not too wasteful and fairly compact. So with that out of the way, let's move on to the SSP now. And I got to tell you, out of all the IMs that I've ever reviewed and tested, I think this might just be my favorite shell ever for a universal. They are just unreal. So let's have a closer look, and hopefully you can see that a bit better now. 2-pin connectors, cable connectors. I mean, just look how tiny that is. So small. At the time of this video, the SSP is only available in this sort of navy blue color, which is fine with me because I think it looks awesome. And just for a quick size comparison, have a look at that next to the Tin Hi-Fi T2 Plus. You can just see how tiny these things are. That is amazing. So apart from the size, there's not a lot to talk about in terms of the physical build, although the build quality is excellent. But feature-wise, there isn't a lot there. It's a very basic design, at least at a glance it's very basic. Obviously there's been a lot of research and development gone into the actual making and design of it. But to talk about it, there isn't much. You can see it's very narrow. The main part of the IEM is this bullet-shaped part which incorporates the nozzle. So there's very little that actually goes in your outer ear. Of course, you got the protective metal mesh cover on the nozzle there, and the 2-pin connector socket there. And apart from that, there isn't really much else to say. But of course, I have to quickly talk about the comfort, and these are one of the most comfortable universal IEMs I've ever used. Simple as that. They are super comfortable. Can wear them all day long. So let's quickly look at the cable now, and it's the same one that came with the SSR, and it's a SPC 4N LITS cable with a transparent TPU coating. It handles really well. It doesn't really have any microphonics. It drapes quite well. It's got a right-angled 3.5mm termination, small disc-shaped Y split there, and for a $39 earphone, this is a nice quality cable. No complaints there whatsoever. So let's move back out. So now it's time to talk about how these sound. And if you follow the chi-fi scene, you've probably heard by now that they are basically the SSR slightly retuned to be more musical and with a fuller body and bigger bass response. And that's true in a sense, but it's not exactly that plain and simple. It goes a lot deeper than that. So you've probably heard that these have more bass than the SSR, the reference. And that is true in a sense, but not in the way you might think. Actually, the bass levels are very similar indeed to the SSR. But instead of boosting the bass, what Moondrop has done is actually slightly scooped out the mid-range a little bit, and the upper mid-range somewhat is being pulled back a little bit. So in effect, that makes the bass seem more, or seem bigger and more in quantity than it was on the previous model, but it's actually not. But getting back to things, starting with the bass, these have a really nice bass, just like the reference model has. Great bass, really good control. It's a very impactful bass, and it's quite physical. You can really get a sensation of a physical feeling in your ear with each bass note hit. And the focus is actually on the mid bass, not so much on the sub bass. What I really like about it is that it feels big, it feels authoritative, but in reality, the quantity or the level of the bass is not that aggressive. It's not boosted heaps far up. It is still slightly behind the upper mid-range, but it just, because of the way you feel it in your ear and the impact of it, it feels huge. But it's fairly fast, not the most textured bass out there. The leading edge is a little blunted and it doesn't have a lot of texture, but overall it is a really good bass, and when you consider the price of these things, it is actually very good. Okay, so let's go on to the mid-range now, and the mids, well, they have been scooped out a little bit. They are not as forward as they were on the reference model, and that does a couple of things. First of all, the lower mid-range notes do have a little extra body, which sort of bleeds over from the mid bass, but actually the mid-range itself is fairly neutral in note size and tone. So male vocals, they're quite articulate, but they're not rich, they're not really sonorous, they're kind of very flat and neutral. It's not boring, but they're just not colored as such. And female vocals are a little bit more forward, but they're not really bright sounding and in your face like the reference. They were on the reference. They are a little more subdued, but still very much up front. And vocals and certain instruments, guitars and pianos, play a very upfront role in the overall presentation. And the resolution is still good. Not as good as it was before, but the trade-off is you get that extra bass, you get that little bit of extra body, and in addition, the upper mid-range has been attenuated slightly, so where there might have been a little bit of sibilance on the SSR, that is now pretty much completely gone. Although when you turn the volume up, and on certain recordings, the upper mid-range can still get a little bit of a glare to it, but really it happens very rarely. And overall, the mid-range is pretty fantastic. Instrument separation is good, overall resolution is good, and the detail is good as well, and they have plenty of clarity too. So let's talk about the treble finally, and the treble hasn't changed a lot from the SSR. It is still mainly focused in the lower treble region, which sort of trails off from the upper mid-range. It has plenty of bite, plenty of energy, and a good density, note density, and it's quite detailed. But as you get up past sort of about 8 kilohertz, I guess, it starts to fall off fairly rapidly, steadily, I should say, fairly steadily. So there isn't a lot of upper treble presence. It basically goes up to 8 kilohertz and then it all starts to fall away, but they don't sound dark as a result, but they don't sound all that light and airy either. There is a density to the treble, which has its own pros and cons, but like I said, there is still plenty of treble there to provide sufficient detail throughout the presentation. And overall, I would say these are probably fairly safe for the treble sensitive, unless it's that lower treble area that you are actually sensitive to. But they do have a little bit of brightness, but it's not a thin or brittle brightness. It's kind of lower down the range a little bit. Now, in terms of soundstage, the SSP is a little bit smaller than the SSR, and that's obviously due to the bass, but because the core mid-range has been slightly attenuated, you get a bit more of a traditional V shape, and that actually helps in a lot of cases to not expand the sound stage, but just help clear things up quite a bit. And of course the instrument separation plays a part in that too. So the stage width is quite good. The depth is actually pretty good too, although the stage position is fairly forward. It's close to the listener, but you still do get a good sense of space and depth behind that center image and to the sides of it. So the sound stage, while not large, is still pretty good, especially once again referring to the low price of these earphones. So to sum up, I really like the sound of the SSP. I think it is definitely an improvement over the SSR in terms of listening pleasure. But having said that, it's really going to depend on what kind of sound you like personally. And personally, I like a sound that's a bit more musical with a bit more body. And I'm willing to trade off a little bit of sort of detail and resolution to get that. While the SSR here, the reference model, does have better mid-range resolution, it does have a bit more detail and a slightly larger stage, it can be a bit glaring to listen to and a little bit fatiguing over time. So for those reasons, the SSP would be my preference out of those two. And compared to the Tin Hi-Fi T2 Plus here, the T2 Plus has a very linear signature, and for some people that'll be a good thing, for others not so good. What it does in a negative sense is it makes the sound kind of less dynamic. It's flatter here. You don't have maybe as much excitement as you do with a more dynamic sort of V-shaped signature. Yes, the mid-range is more forward in the mix, but then again the bass is up there right with it as well. So vocals tend to sink back into the mix, be more a part of it. They don't really float above it like they do so well on the SSP here. But I do like the extra bass, sub-bass extension of the T2 Plus here. I still really like the T2 Plus, and I think in which one is better, well, again, personal preference. Personally, I would probably go for the SSP, although I really do love the upper treble, the airiness of the T2 Plus here, which is something that one thing that I didn't like so much about the Pulse. And finally, of course, I had to mention the Blonde BL03, because I know if I didn't, then I would have hundreds of people in the comments saying, how does it compare to the BL03? Well, you Blonde fans will be happy to know, I think the BL03 here still holds the crown in this price point. But whether it works for you, like I've said many times before, it's going to depend on how this cable works for you, unless you're willing to pay extra to get a third-party cable. And the nozzles are quite short, so you really need the right ear tip and cable combination to get a good fit. If you have that, I think the sound quality of the Blonde is still superior to this, although this is technically superior. It has better instrument separation, slightly better resolution and better detail, but there is just that X factor, that something magic about the Blonde that people love, and I love it too. And if I had to choose between these, I would take the kind of ugly Blonde, which is a shame because, like I said, I absolutely love these shells to bits. All right, guys, so that's it for this video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. And if you're new to the channel and want to see more reviews like this in the future, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And until next time, I'll see you later.